Hi, and welcome back to my podcast. I'm Susan Regan, and I'm talking more about codependency. I'm just trying to address this issue in different ways so that you can get a sense of how to manage any codependency issues that you have or tendencies, and also to just give yourself permission to expand your mind and just notice the concepts of codependency. And if you relate to them, if you see them in your family and friends or in your own relationships, it's just good to take a little bit of a stake in how you're managing your relationship these days. So, my first thing that I wanted to really address was how, when you're listening to a lecture or information or a podcast, how do you get in a headspace where you can actually be receptive to it? So, there's tons of podcasts out there that you could listen to. And I know myself, sometimes I look up a subject and see what podcast is on there. And basically, I listen for a few minutes and say, do I really relate to this? Or is this making me feel better? Or is this making me feel worse about whatever situation or topic it is? So I want you to be asking yourself that question. There's the ego part of the mind, and the ego part of the mind is very alert. And it's actually the part of your mind that sort of tells a narrative about you and about your life and how this material sort of fits into your life. So if it's the ego, it's going to be critical. You're going to feel defensive. You're going to be comparing yourself to other people, maybe judging yourself. And this story that you're writing about yourself based on how it's being elicited in the information that in here, the way that I'm feeding the information here to you, and it could be like, oh, this proves that my relationship's healthy, or this proves that my relationship's unhealthy, or I'm a good person, or I'm not a good person. So I want you to try to get yourself into a neutral space so that you're just listening. You're not drawing conclusions, you're just listening. And right now, the listening could be like, oh, yeah, how do I listen? And is my ego really involved in actually coming in and giving me, or I'm hearing two dialogues, the information and my ego translating the information to fit my situation or not fit my situation. If you're listening neutrally, you are watching that voice coming in. And if it is coming and you're like, I am just listening, I'm just trying to draw my own conclusions about what the information is educating me about. And there is this saying in anonymous groups, which is take what works and leave the rest. And this, I think, is very true in codependency, is if you're trying to heal the inner critic or the part of you that's actually motivated externally, that part of the job of healing is to get motivated internally, right? And the way you can have internal motivation is you do it through positive thinking, things that help, things that make you feel better, not things that pathologize you more or things that make you feel like I have the worst story than anyone else. That is not a way that you're like moving out of external, focus or validation. So internal validation is that I'm starting to get to know myself, and some of the things that I hear and do in my own knowing of myself and my own internal work is that you're trying to relate some material to help yourself that's either positive or gives you direction or makes you feel calm or makes you feel understood. So that's the kind of thing that builds that internal locus of control. And I talk about that a lot with kids. Like parents teach their kids how to have an internal locus of control, a direction, a routine, a way of thinking about things that helps build structure and a sense of belonging in yourself, right? That you're not just alone, abandoned, need to prove yourself all the time, that actually you can sit back and have something inside yourself that fills you up. That's you. It's so when you're listening to material, to try to understand yourself more. I also want to make sure that you're using it to understand yourself more. And the more that you understand aspects of yourself and accept them, the more that you become a stronger, more centered, grounded person, because there's something there that's you. And you know that saying that goes like, no matter where you go, there you are. So no matter where you go, there you are. So even in this thought that I'm going to be giving you today in this workshop about codependency, or this conversation about codependency, you're going to be taking in some information, listening to it, and applying what works. And that's how you grow. You can grow in all sorts of ways. And one of the main ways we grow is in relationship. And it could be in relationship to ourselves, and the relationship to the materials that we feel like are healing us. But healing comes from a positive leads you into a positive direction. It leads you out of being stuck in certain addictions or patterns. And it leads you into, I can have more freedom in my life because I understand how I get affected and the patterns of behavior I do when I'm really in my worst place. So to think about maybe even taking some notes as you're hearing me talk, and to take that note about how are you listening to what I'm saying, and what part of you are you getting to know that you might have to work through the first layer. Like the first layer, when I get material, I'm really just not feeling like I don't get it, I don't understand, I can't get these concepts, I'm not that smart. There's the ego, right? So we try to relax the ego and go inside and really sit with ourselves, like how is this helping me? What is this helping me understand more about myself or my world? And it's in that relationship of patience and understanding and giving yourself time to apply things to yourself in a way that's like, is that helpful really? Or is that really setting me back and making me feel all mixed up and confused, frustrated and pathologized? So watch how you're thinking as I'm talking to you, and see if you can find a freedom, and how you're exploring how your mind investigates different concepts and what concepts really work for you. One of the biggest things I want to reveal about codependency is that codependency is something that you learn from childhood. It's whether or not you felt that you had to be someone or take care of someone to get love and to feel valued and like you mattered. And so a lot of times we have childhood, we have the shadows that develop from our childhood, and then we have boundaries that we can continue to learn and perfect as we grow and evolve. And our boundaries hopefully will change, because our boundaries take care of us, just like when we are giving boundaries to a child or boundaries to a dog, it actually helps them feel safe. And boundaries are the way we keep ourselves safe. And it's based on you just being able to be internally connected and grounded with yourself, so that you're not seeking external validation. And sometimes when you're seeking and you need external validation, you'll do anything for it. And a lot of what you do for it is you give yourself away. You give your energy away to other people, or you allow people to drain your energy, because that's the only way you feel like you can get them or have their attention. So when we're in any kind of codependency relationship, we are actually plugging into that other person more than we're plugging into ourselves. And we are focusing on them as more important than ourselves, and loving them more than we love ourselves. And so this diagram is unequal, right? It talks about us not having anything, the codependent not having anything, and everything we give out, everything else gets more than us, right? So there's often, you see that codependents have a really hard time taking care of themselves, not working so much, time management, not knowing when to stop, because they're constantly giving themselves away as something that they knew and learned how to do very, very young. So people might have been doing it for like half of their lives, more than half of their lives, 50 years sometimes. And remember that not to be discouraged about anything that you're hearing today that is like, oh, I think that's me. As long as you're remembering, is that my ego mind? Or is that me internal grounded, thinking like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm actually going to internalize that thought and use it as a motivator. Like, yeah, keep something for yourself. Don't give it all away. Who you were as a child is not who you are now. So once you unplug from the person that you're giving it all to, and you bring that back to yourself, that energy back, that energetic, you get to be in your shadow. And when you actually acknowledge your shadow, you become more magnetic, you become more real, you become more you. And your shadow might be like, I just can't handle that, or I need help with that, or that makes me scared, or that makes me really anxious. So when we're scared and really anxious, we are actually not in our best place. But if we talk about it and we try to develop coping mechanisms or telling trusted people that we have an issue that we're struggling with, instead of reflecting and focusing on another person, we can actually fill ourselves up with the light and the shadow of ourselves, right? And that's getting to know ourselves more. Oh, I might have to set a boundary that doesn't make me feel very good, and I can't really be myself. That's how I know I can't really be myself. That's how I know I need to have a boundary there. Instead of looking at my own shadow, and that means the things that I need help with, the things that I need to understand more, the things that make me feel unintegrated or very, very anxious. If you focus more on that and figure out that, then you become more of your whole person. And I'm going to focus on that other person because it's almost safer for me to do that than to focus on myself. So this is such a key concept, and I hope you're hearing it and listening to it very carefully. Childhood, shadow work, and then boundaries as a way of healing your codependency. So we have a lifetime to do our healing. And a lot of folks that I meet are doing their healing maybe in their late 30s, 40s, typically. And so we might have lived a lot of life, not being very integrated, not really understanding ourselves, not really helping ourselves deal with things that might be really challenging for us, or understanding where they come from. And so I hear and see a lot of people that deal with their own self-talk. It's so negative. It's so beating themselves up. It's so hard on themselves. Like no matter where they go, every single minute of the day, they might have to be countering this bad thought about themselves. And so, in a way, there you have it. There's one of the shadow pieces, right? That the negative self-talk came from somewhere. And was it that you didn't get seen as a kid, and so you just sort of made up that the reason why that was happening was because you weren't a really good kid and you weren't worth paying attention to, and are being guided, or being acknowledged for your accomplishments or some of your talents or skill sets, that what was getting noticed by the adults in your world was the way that you helped, or the way that you focused on another person, or the way that you consoled somebody who was older than you. So think about, where all that negative self-talk is as the shadow side of you. Where did it come from in your childhood? And then the boundary might even be with your self-talk. Like, no, you can't talk like that to yourself anymore. It's so disrespectful. Okay, I need you to notice something good about yourself right now so that you can go up and do that talk or have that meeting. So it's so important to look at the origin of things and to give yourself some space to start learning about yourself and your patterns of how you behave with other people and how you treat yourself and the areas of your life that have been really difficult for you. So one thing for sure is that there's a tendency with codependent people to be very hypervigilant about the situations they're in, cueing more into the people around them than into themselves. And this was a survival mechanism. So it's so important that you see that. As a child, you had to like look around the room and imagine, if you can, just imagine even today what it's like for you when you go into a room, let's say a room with your family, a room with your colleagues, a room with strangers. And if you have more of a hypervigilance or a tendency to over tune into other people, how do you enter that room? Are you entering that room just with internalized thoughts of yourself, like you're doing fine, just have fun, take a look around, who do you want to stand next to, or who do you want to say hello to? A hypervigilant, maybe codependent, very sensitive person will walk around looking at what are people thinking, and then they might be even making up what some of that thinking is. So there is a tendency too, if you're very tuned in, to have a difficult time being around people who are not integrated. And what I mean by that is like there's no self-regulation. People might be very emotional or very shut down. And so it would be really difficult for someone who's very sensitive and tuned in to be around that, and much easier to be with people who can communicate well, that their affect, their expression on their face matches their feelings, that they're verbalizing either their comfort or their discomfort. And then a sensitive person can be like, oh, I can see now what's happening. I don't have to guess. I don't have to make it up. And I don't have to make it about me to solve it. So, so to think about, when you think about yourself as a person, and maybe you have, codependent tendencies, maybe you felt like in your marriage you self-sacrificed a lot, that your whole role was focusing on everybody's emotional needs but yours. And so I wonder if you can know the codependent side of you and understand when that shows up and when that's activated. And if you can understand also the baseline of who you really are. It's such a question, right? Because if we're feeling projected on, like people are projecting stuff onto to us, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, maybe it's the narrative we tell ourselves. And if we're also projecting onto other people what's going on, we don't know, we're like reading into their expression or their body language or what they did or didn't say to us, then there can be a lot of lack of integration in that. And the tendency, if you're not integrated, if you go into a space where you're feeling really uncomfortable and anxious, and you're in your worst space, you're not in your grounded space, you're in your place of fear. So usually if we're in our place of fear or anxiety, we're not showing up well. So it's hard to know like what is reality and that point. And one of the things to think about is to try to remember who you are. Who are you? Like in your best times, who are you? And when you get to be yourself, who are you? Maybe you're funny. Maybe you also smile a lot. Maybe you're really relaxed. Maybe you're really laid back. But if you're in situations where you feel threatened, or you have to mind read, or you're dissociating a little bit because things are a little scary, then you're not who you are. And to be able to tell that shift, right? Tell of that shift in you, and believe in some ways, you can't really believe in projections, right? And projections can be very controlling. Your projections, another person's projections onto you, right? But one of the things that you can believe is when you're being thrown off, and when you're confused, and when you're all mixed up, and when you don't know what your orientation is, or if it's your ego talking, or you're just listening and trying to stay in your solid sense of self, focusing on yourself. So remember, the breath is always available to you. Your breath is always available to you to use as an anchoring tool. So when you're feeling really confused, you might want to breathe and feel yourself in your body, right? Just feel yourself in your body just for a few minutes. And the minutes can be short, right? It doesn't have to be a few 60-minute minutes. It can be just 1 minute to feel yourself in your body. When I've worked with people who've had not a solid ego strength or sense of self, the times that they've felt the most powerful and most clear is when they're exercising. And when they're exercising, they can go from a distorted self-image, like I'm super fat or not, don't like my body, to I just, ran a few miles and now I feel like a completely different person and my mind is now in sync and I have structure. Because what happened there, a lot of breathing, a lot of letting go of feelings happen when you exercise, a lot of recalibrating your thought patterns, and you become much clearer because you're thinking, okay, all the things that were bothering you almost get vented out. And then you're actually, because you've expanded some energy, you are now calmer. So there are things that you can do to help yourself get back your more, I don't know, would you say rational or even perspective about things? And so think about when you're in your best self, what are you usually doing? When you're in your most solid part of yourself, when you're the calmest, when you're the clearest, what are you doing? And then also another question to ask yourself is what has been the most easiest boundaries for you to set? Some people never can say no, and some people say it pretty well in certain situations, and other situations are really challenged by saying no. And so I would ask yourself that question. What's the easiest boundaries you're able to hold? And what's the hardest ones? What's going on that makes them difficult? And maybe you feel sorry for somebody, really sorry. So you can't hold a boundary because you're feeling too sorry for them and you're projecting like maybe if you help them, things will be better for them. And that's another thing to notice is that whole idea about fixing somebody in a relationship. And so sometimes that fixing is the way that, oh, we kind of have false hope, like, oh, if we could just fix that, if we could just change the way we deal with that or how we say that, then everything's going to be better. But maybe that's false hope, because relationships are usually two people, and there's always a relational dynamic. You can work on yours, but you can't make somebody actually be more in tune with themselves. That's something that they have to do, and it completely affects you if you're with someone who's not attuned to themselves. So here's some thoughts that I wanted you to think more about.